there's no need for new pilots right now. It doesn't mean it's going to happen forever. But I think for this new crew of pilots, many of whom may have said, I want to be an airline pilot, and went to a formal school, got all the ratings, flew at a regional, got hired by a major, and then may end up being furloughed for some point, may say, oh my God, it's the end of the world. I mean, having lost a few jobs over my lifetime, I can tell you, get used to it, guys. It's the way the airline industry works.
That was Flying Magazine senior editor Rob Mark talking about what's next for pilots planning on a career with the airlines. Hello again, and welcome to the Aviation News Talk podcast. I'm Max Truscott, and this is our weekly show dedicated to everything general aviation, such as news and safety tips for pilots and student pilots like you. Today, in light of the challenges we're facing with the coronavirus, I decided to lighten things up and hopefully give you a laugh or two. And to that end, I took the dozen or so weird aviation stories that came through my news feed in the last 3 weeks, and I invited Rob Mark to read through them with me and to add some commentary. And in the middle of the show, we took a little break to talk about how the coronavirus is affecting Rob's work at Flying Magazine and what it means to people training now to join the airlines. And after our conversation with Rob, I'll tell you a little about how my life has changed in the last week due to coronavirus. Now, last week in episode 141, we talked about the $1 million Go Fly Prize competition and about some of the people who designed vertical takeoff and landing vehicles to compete for the big prize. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you're new to the show, please click on the subscribe button on whatever app you're listening to us in so that each new episode of Aviation News Talk will be downloaded to your phone as soon as it's released. And it won't cost you anything. Now here's our conversation with Rob Mark. And to help us here today is Rob Mark, senior editor at Flying Magazine, who also publishes the Jetwine blog at jetwine.com. He's worked as both an air traffic controller, an airline corporate pilot, and a CFI. Rob, thanks so much for joining us again here today.
I can't believe you brought me back on after all the comments that you got from your listeners the last time, Max. I mean, you must really be desperate for a guest today.
You know, it turns out that I have this guest jacket here with a big number 5 on it, and I don't have anybody to give it to. So I thought I might as well bring you back on. This is your 5th time on the show, Rob.
Holy smokes. Well, it's the least my little brother could do for me. I mean, Mom always liked you better anyway, but I think it's great that you're doing this outreach to try to mend things over the years.
Oh, that's it. This is outreach, all kinds of intervention here. Hey, speaking of intervention, this is helping me out in a big way because as I was going through the stories for the regular weekly news show, I found just an incredibly large number of strange stories. Usually I find 1 or 2. There were so many this week, I thought we need a separate show. So thanks for helping me sort through them all.
So we would call this News of the Strange or something like that.
Something like that, yeah, because it's kind of fun to just kind of look at some of the weird things that happen in aviation. They don't happen often, but it's just kind of fun to see what kind of crazy stuff does happen.
Well, it is amazing because there are times that a bunch of pilots will get together and someone will tell us a story about something and people go, get out of here. You're making that up. And then you find out that they were telling the truth because there are some strange things that happen in this industry.
Well, the cool thing is we don't have to make any of this stuff up because some of it's stranger than fiction anyway. So kind of good that this material is provided for us.
And luckily, it didn't include us in any of these.
That's true. I have removed our names from all these stories to protect the guilty. Now, actually, some of the names are still in there, and you're right. None of them are us. Hey, let's kick it off with 2 drug stories. Now, this first one's pretty weird. You want to run with it?
So our first story about a suspected drug dealer jumping out of a moving airplane in Honolulu came from the Hawaii News Now. What the heck is Hawaii News Now? Is there a Hawaii News the other day or what?
That's right. That's for old news, but this is new news.
Okay, this is new news. So it says that the drug dealer was apparently moving a large amount of crystal meth. Those of you that watched Breaking Bad will know what that is right off the bat. And apparently, as the airplane was, this small airplane was taxiing out to the runway to depart, the suspect who looks incredibly guilty at this point, although they are still effectively a suspect, got a call on their cell phone, and they suddenly decided to jump out of the airplane as it was taxiing to the runway. Apparently, after the person, this is using the pronoun she, so it must have been a lady. After escaping from the airplane on the taxiway, the suspect called the pilot and asked for a refund since she didn't use the airplane anyway. Okay, that's pretty cool. But the good news is that the person left behind 2 Ziploc bags containing 335 grams of crystal meth, which is 335 grams. How many pounds is that, Max? You're good with those.
I figured you could tell me how many dollars that was worth on the street.
I just remember from Breaking Bad, I know a lot of meth would have been worth a lot of money, but I think what's interesting is that they jumped out of the airplane while it was taxiing. So I'm kind of thinking that this airplane wasn't moving too fast, or was it? We don't know the details, but.
And I think that was clever of them, but they should have kept their eye on where the real money was. I mean, I guess the lesson here is don't leave your drugs behind when you're jumping out of an airplane. And by the way, I actually pulled up the criminal complaint for this and read the affidavit from the DEA agent, and it said that the bags had broken open and that the drugs were spread on the floor. So I don't know if that happened as she was hopping out of the airplane or what. But anyway, sounds like a bad day all the way around.
Well, you know what? Most of these drug dealers, from what I hear, and I remember this from Breaking Bad, they're always trying to cut the drugs anyway. So what's a little dust and dirt off the floor when they, kind of scoop it all back up and put it in the bag? I mean, it would sell for a little less, maybe. I don't know.
And you're probably wondering, what kind of airplane was it?
Yes. In fact, I was searching for that desperately as I was reading this, but I don't know. What kind of an airplane was it?
Well, I found the N number in the complaint, and it was a Partenavia P-68. Are you familiar with that?
Aha. Yes. That's the twin engine airplane. I think it's a fixed gear twin or something.
Yeah, it looks like it. Sure.
Yeah.
It comes out of Italy, I believe, built back in the early 70s. It's a high-wing 6-seat twin with a pair of Lycoming 200 horsepower engines slung under it. So it's kind of like a high-wing version of the Piper Seneca, I would say.
Wow. And I wonder how, I'm just doing the conversion here real quickly about how many pounds are, 330. See, 335 grams equals about 3/4 of a pound. So maybe one of our listeners, after doing their own research, can tell you what the street value of 3/4 of a pound of crystal meth is.
Well, you know what? Let's move on to our next story because they don't deal in ounces.
Okay.
This is a smart drug runner. He deals in pounds. This comes from the current.com, which is a Hartford, Connecticut newspaper. And it says a Milford pilot, which is up in Connecticut, who was transporting 400 pounds of marijuana, sentenced to 2.5 years in federal prison for his role in a cross-country marijuana trafficking conspiracy. Donald Burns, 62, who's going to be a little older when he gets out of jail, must also serve 2 years of supervised release under his sentence. Now, this goes back to 2016, though he was just sentenced here in the last week or so, in which he was bringing a single-engine Piper that he owned on regular flights from Northern California back to the Southwest U.S. Agents tracked him in 2017, found he stopped in Texas, Arkansas, and West Virginia before arriving at Sikorsky Airport in Stratford, Connecticut. He was arrested after officials searched his plane one night, finding 400 pounds of vacuum-sealed marijuana. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy and to distribute 1,000 kilograms or more. He also forfeited his Piper aircraft. So here's a case where, drugs don't pay, especially if you're pilot distributing them.
Well, a couple of things jump out at me. I wonder if he was logging cross-country time as he was, operating this business of transporting the drugs.
I suspect he was building time for an airline job. What do you think?
Yeah, 400 pounds of grass. That's That's a pretty sizable amount of stuff. And I remember, here's a funny story that I remember from back in my youth. I used to work at Opelika Airport outside Miami, Oscar Papa Fox. And we had, because I used to work in the tower up there. And I remember one time a Goonie bird came in a Goonie bird, for all those of you who are not aviation savvy yet. It's a DC-3. Landed one night, taxied over to a part of the ramp where transient airplanes would park that didn't need fuel, and just started unloading stuff. And maybe half an hour after they're into this, we see all these squad cars show up. I mean, half a dozen, lights flashing and all that. The guy had landed on the public ramp and was unloading all these drugs that he'd brought in the Goonie bird into a truck, and just figured he'd never get caught. And he did it right there in broad daylight, and he got caught. Imagine that. So this guy is obviously not a whole lot smarter.
Nope, apparently not. That or he didn't have any good job alternatives. Hey, why don't you read this next one here? It comes from yourcentralvalley.com, which is here in the Central Valley of California.
A teen was arrested on Monday for laying on the runway in Hanford, California, according to the Kings County Sheriff's Office. It says a sheriff's office volunteer pilot and flight deputy were landing the Kings County Sheriff's Office airplane called Sky King 1. Oh, wow. At the Hanford Municipal Airport when it nearly struck a dark object, according to the authorities. The pilot turned the airplane around to see what the object was and remove it from the runway, and it was later determined to be a 17-year-old juvenile person lying face down on the runway. Okay. Deputies say as they approached the teen lying down on the runway, he suddenly sat up and began scooting away from them. At one point, the teen attempted to bite one of the deputies and refused to follow commands. It sounds like my dog when he was a puppy, but I'm sure this is something else entirely. Authorities say as the deputy grabbed onto the teen's arm, the subject reached towards his waistband area, and in doing so, the deputy cut his hand on a folding knife that was in the open position concealed in the teen's waistband. The 17-year-old was handcuffed and taken into custody, later transported to the hospital for evaluation. I hope there was a psychiatric evaluation in that. The deputy who cut his hand received several stitches and is expected to make a full recovery. The 17-year-old juvenile is unfortunately still a juvenile.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely some mental problems with that young man. Hey, you kind of laughed about Sky King 1. What kind of aircraft would you guess this is about?
Sky King, was it a King Air?
Well, what do you think? Sheriff's Office. What kind of airplane would they be using for patrolling and then give a name Sky King to?
Helicopter? No? 182?
No, this is kind of interesting. I remember when they got this aircraft, and I looked it up just to confirm that I remembered correctly. They use an LSA. It is a Flight Design CTLS, which is Sky King 1.
Sky King, and I'll bet you nobody even knows who Sky King is.
You can remind people who don't know.
Sky King was a television series that some of us who were enamored with airplanes watched when we were young'uns. I think I was very young. No, but that used to be Sky King flew I think he had a Bamboo bomber to start with, which was an old twin Cessna.
That's right.
Then he had a 310.
Exactly.
And he had his niece Penny, who was always his sidekick and getting in and out of trouble. And they used their we actually, we think about that. We had a lot of great airplane TV shows. We had Whirlybirds. We had, what was another one? Something or other. But anyway, all right. So there were these great TV shows with airplanes. It doesn't matter. But this kid is not going to be one of them.
Nope, sadly. So speaking of stupid things to do, this is really apropos for what's going on right now. This comes from Fox40.com, which is a TV station in Nashville, Tennessee. This story is just from a day or two ago. American Airlines flight from Dallas to Nashville took off over 8 hours late, was delayed 3 times after a man reportedly joked about having Yeah, you guessed it, coronavirus. Funny guy. Flight 1076 to Nashville was supposed to arrive at 8:40 on Saturday, but did not finally arrive until 4:40 a.m. on Sunday. The man, who has not been identified, reportedly wouldn't lift his tray table up before the plane took off, at which point he claimed he had coronavirus. People were freaked out because nobody knew what was going on, said a passenger. People didn't know if he was actually sick or if he really didn't have coronavirus or not. Hazmat crews and police officers boarded the airplane and had the man removed. Police told a passenger who had spoken with the man that he wasn't all there. So it sounds like we've got two mental issue stories here in a row. Right after he was escorted off the plane, one of the cops came back and kind of explained the situation of the people that were sitting near him and kind of spelled it out for us and told us not to worry about it, and really was just talking about how he was joking about having the coronavirus, said one passenger. Panic soon turned to frustration for passengers of the plane, as part of the flight crew did not want to fly after the incident. Crew issues and maintenance issues led to further delays, all totaling about 8 hours. The man who created the initial havoc was arrested. And they do note that DFW is one of 13 airports here in the U.S. where Americans can come back after visiting restricted countries and are then flown into these airports for testing of coronavirus. American also acknowledged the passenger was arrested for making a false claim, and I would hope that they also ban this guy from life. I mean, this is nuts.
It is. That is one of the. It's like those people that would say, "Oh well, you better get out of my way because I've got a bomb in my briefcase here," or people that make those kinds of jokes obviously don't get it. They really do not get it. That certain kinds of things are not even remotely funny and are not the way to take it out on your fellow passengers or the crew or the airline when things don't go your way. And obviously, I think they were correct when they said the man wasn't all there. I don't know where the rest of him was, but I'd say all of him is probably going to be in jail for a while.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of this stuff is funny if you're just talking with your friends and you're not at an airport or you're not on an airplane. When you get into that environment, you just got to kind of clean up your act a little bit. Play it straight, folks, because they don't take this stuff as a joke. Whether it's joking about bombs, weapons, coronavirus, just leave those jokes for some other place, but not the airport.
Oh Lord. And unfortunately, the kinds of people that would do this just would shake their heads and say, "Oh, I thought it was funny."
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Do you want me to read the next one?
Yeah, go for it.
This is about an accident from a Turkish flight from Pegasus Airlines. The Dutch co-pilot of this airplane, which I believe was a 737.
Yep, that's right.
The plane skidded off the runway at Istanbul's, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of that airport. This happened last month. It skidded off the runway, killing 3 people. And they're saying the Dutch first officer did not understand guidance in Turkish and failed to brake in time, according to a report seen by Reuters. The Pegasus airplane, flying in from the western city of Izmir, sped off the end of the wet runway and broke into 3 pieces after dropping 30 meters. And state media later said the flight's captain was arrested. Now, of course, that also brings up another topic that isn't even remotely funny, that is outside of the United States. There are a lot of people in this industry that have been arrested for being criminally negligent just in the performance of their duties. Now, I'm not passing judgment, good or bad, on this crew, but I'm just saying these people didn't even wait. They just took them away in cuffs. According to a preliminary report seen by Reuters on Thursday, the tower initially told the pilot to hold off from landing due to harsh weather, but it said the Dutch co-pilot did not understand the Turkish guidance, and it said the tower then allowed the airplane to land, but the pilots did not brake in a timely manner. I mean, this whole story sounds pretty strange. There are some parts of this that don't even make any sense. Officials from Pegasus were not immediately available to comment on the report. I wonder why. The airspeed indicator showed 57 knots. Speed brakes and thrust reversers were turned off, which sounds about normal in that airplane because it ends up throwing up more junk into the engines than it should if you keep them out forever. But that kind of makes me think the crew had no idea how close they were to the end of the runway. The deceleration when the first manual brake was used at a speed of 84 knots was not enough. Therefore, the plane ran off the runway at 60 knots. The report also said the audio recordings from the flight showed the pilots panicked over possible damage after the airplane was struck by lightning some 6 minutes before landing. Okay. This little note came in from, I guess the flight was Pegasus 2193, and this came out of Wikipedia. So it said the plane attempted to land in heavy rain and strong tailwinds. Thunderstorm with strong gusty winds was passing through the area, and 2 other aircraft aborted their attempts shortly before this one landed. An investigation of the pilots was held on speculation of crew negligence. Pilots received treatment in the hospital before they were taken to a police station to provide their statements. Negligence. Well, I guess it would be criminally negligent if they did this on purpose, knowing what was going to happen. But if they're just plain stupid, I don't know. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, there are a whole lot of aspects to this story which are kind of unusual. It sounds like the co-pilot didn't understand the instructions from the tower. It sounds like the tower initially said that they should abort their landing attempt and go around as the prior 2 aircraft had done. I read somewhere that there was a lot of standing water on the runway, so it may be that they were hydroplaning. And if that's the case, that's probably why they told the prior 2 aircraft to go around. Apparently, they also landed with a tailwind, and I think most pilots know that your landing distance goes up tremendously with a tailwind. Most of the POHs I've seen say that for every 2 knots of tailwind, you get about a 10% increase. And that means if you got a 10-knot tailwind, hey, it's going to take 50% more distance to land the airplane. So, yeah, a lot of weird, bad things happen on this particular aircraft. But the most unusual, I think, is getting arrested afterwards.
Well, and realize, too, these are supposedly professional pilots. I mean, a 737 is not a tiny airplane, but you can make just as many stupid decisions in a 737 as you can flying a small airplane. You don't land with a tailwind. You don't land in heavy rain when there are strong gusty winds, as in the sense of a thunderstorm, because it's not worth it. Go somewhere else and wait. Hold outside the area for 15 or 20 minutes because, and I've certainly seen this, I'm sure you have, that when thunderstorms are mean, they pass through pretty quickly. It is not worth it to try to get the darn thing on the ground when holding for 15, 20, 25 minutes even outside would allow you to come back in and land on maybe a wet runway, but at least you could see what was going on. So what were these people thinking?
Yeah, they certainly had multiple risk factors. And boy, maybe one risk factor you can handle, you start cascading multiple risk factors and bad things happen. Well, it's not just pilots that sometimes have news of the weird. We've got a couple stories with mechanics. This first one comes from AJC.com. It says an aviation maintenance student faces a federal charge after allegedly trying to pay a test administrator $2,500 for a passing grade on his FAA exam, prosecutors said. Oh boy, that was not a smart move.
Everybody knows it costs more than $2,500.
Exactly. Frank Giallianamaro, 21 of Las Vegas, faces 1 count of criminal information with bribery after authorities said he came to Duluth and paid the test administrator to pass him on the agency's airframe and power plant test. The FAA requires mechanics to obtain this certification in order to perform aircraft maintenance and approve equipment for return to service. Mechanic students must take 1,900 hours of classroom and practical training before taking several tests, including 43 technical subjects. Amaro was a student at an aviation maintenance school in Las Vegas. In November, he allegedly contacted the Atlanta-based mechanic examiner, tried to bribe him for the certification. The administrator immediately notified authorities of the solicitation attempt and agreed to work with him. Over the next few weeks, Amaro and the test administrator agreed that he would take the airframe and power plant examination in Duluth on December 16th. Authorities said in a news release, in exchange for a passing score, he allegedly offered the man $500 up front and another $2,000 on the day of the test. And I'm guessing that this is probably not the kind of person we wanted working on our plane anyway.
You know, all of these stories that we're talking about make you realize that there are some really stupid people out there. People that these are almost, well, I'd like to say some of this is funny, but it's so sad in some cases. Don't try this at home. If you can't pass the test on your own, don't take it, because no one is going to want you. You can't bribe a Fed to pass the test. They don't tend to like that.
Nope. And I think the sad thing is, my observation is that, people who try to break the law in one area tend to do it in other areas as well. So my guess is this is not the first time that he tried to, break the law. It's probably the first time he got caught, which is probably a rude awakening.
Well, here's another one. A former American Airlines mechanic was sentenced to 37 months in prison for attempting to destroy an airplane. A man with a very long name who was 60 years old pleaded guilty to tampering with the air data module on American Airlines Flight 2834, which was scheduled to fly from Miami to Nassau last summer with 150 people on board. It says a cockpit error message alerted the pilots to the problem before the aircraft left the ground and it returned for maintenance. Now, this man who had been working for American since 1988, so a 30-year veteran, was arrested after being identified on security cam footage. And as previously reported by AvWeb, he told investigators his intention was to cause the flight to be delayed or canceled so he could collect overtime pay to make up for financial hardship caused by stalled contract negotiations between American and its mechanics union. Okay. Wednesday's ruling found that there was no evidence to support the allegations made by the prosecutors that this man might have links to terrorist organizations. Thank goodness he's just plain stupid.
Yeah. I think lots of people have money problems from time to time, and we're probably going to see a lot of folks with money problems here in the next few months as our country and other countries around the world deal with the coronavirus. But you just can't break the law as, a way to try and solve your financial problems.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask you about that $50 that I loaned you last year. I haven't seen it yet. And the interest is triple compounding. Now you owe me at least $64. So it's just going to keep mounting. The pressure will build, Max. Just pay off your debt.
Got to tell you, my kneecaps are nervous.
Did you ever have a situation when you were younger in flying where you got so nervous that your legs would shake?
I did have one time. Yeah.
Yeah, I had that once too. And it was amazing when for me, the instructor said, okay, just stop doing that. Calm down. I said, I can't stop. It just keeps, my right leg would just kind of keep bouncing like I was on the balls of my feet, although I was sitting down. I said, I can't stop it. And my knee was bouncing up and down in the air. It was really weird, but I managed to overcome it a couple of weeks ago. So it's not a big deal.
Well, and hey, this is probably a good time just to take a break here. And let me ask you, how has your life changed here in the last week or so due to coronavirus? Doing anything differently?
Well, in the last week, we've had a lot of cancellations, trips. Of course, flying was supposed to send me down to Sun and Fun in Lakeland, Florida. That got canceled. I was supposed to go to another conference in Manhattan. That got canceled. I was supposed to go to eBase in Europe. That got canceled. Right now, I'm just hoping I make it to AirVenture. But again, I think from the news that we heard today, everybody is kind of hunkering down in place and just hoping for the best. And because there's really not much else we can do. In Illinois, at least, bars and restaurants are all closed. People are going out for food, and that's about it. So I guess it's a good thing we have our Netflix subscription up to date, but it gives me a chance to get ahead on a few stories that I'm writing. But it's weird. I've never seen anything like this before. I mean,
No.
the cancellations, the fleet groundings for the airlines are just unbelievable. I mean, I think Delta grounded 40% of its fleet. I think American's cutting its schedule by about 50% domestically. I don't know if I got that right. I'll have to check that.
Yeah.
But
In fact, I saw United was cutting 50%. So they're all kind of in that ballpark. What do you think that's going to mean for either folks who are flying that recently got hired by the airlines, or for people who have been working on an airline career, people who are just maybe finishing up some of those ratings and thinking they might be doing interviews with the airlines soon?
Well, I think we're going to find that most of the airlines are going to halt classes right, immediately. There's no need for new pilots right now. It doesn't mean it's going to happen forever, but I think for this new crew of pilots, many of whom may have said, I want to be an airline pilot, and went to a formal school, got all the ratings, flew at a regional, got hired by a major, and then may end up being furloughed for some point, may say, oh my God, it's the end of the world. I mean, having lost a few jobs over my lifetime, I can tell you, get used to it, guys. It's the way the airline industry works. It's the way the aviation industry works. It is cyclical. It is also subject to the whims of the economy. And right now, the economy's in kind of free fall. I know that they've stopped the trading on the New York Exchange 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks because of the volatility. Again, it will come back. It will. It always does. If it doesn't, well, then trust me, we've all got a lot of problems. But I believe it will come back. It always does. But this kind of thing happens. So don't decide now is the time to go to veterinary school, because it really isn't. It'll come back, but it may get a little lean for a few months, and that's just part of the way it all goes.
Yes, I agree. I think probably the best advice for folks that have their heart set on an airline career is to let them know, yep, this is going to set you back some number of months. It's certainly more than 1 or 2 months, and it's probably less than a year in terms of when you finally get hired. But it's also the time, I think, just redouble your efforts in education. Just go ahead and double down and make sure that you're absolutely an expert on every aspect in aviation. So when you do go through that interview, you're going to be extremely knowledgeable. I think it's the people that prepare now in the bad times that are best positioned to get hired when hiring starts again.
Well, I think that's true. And for those that didn't plan at all, saying this was a piece of cake from the day I started my first flying lessons to when I got hired by the regionals and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what, guys? You've been missing the reality of the industry, and now I'm afraid this is some of it. The way this has gone down this time is kind of unusual because there's no real end in sight, but I think we can certainly learn from what happened in China that just now, I think they're starting to report very, very few new cases of the virus in China. But when did we first start hearing about that? In the middle of January, I think. So that's a couple of months.
Yeah, we'll get through it, I think, in a couple of months. Well, today they announced here in the San Francisco Bay Area for all 6 counties, shelter-in-place order, and only essential businesses can remain open. So we all are supposed to stay here at the house and only go out if we, need food and essentials and stuff like that. So anyway, I think it's a great opportunity to continue making some social contacts via telephone and the internet. I got to tell you, over the last 4 or 5 days, because I've been sheltered at home here for almost a week now. I kind of took it upon myself early to do that. I have had more fun talking with people on the phone than I have in a long time. I've talked to on the phone more in the last 3-4 days than I have in the prior month.
So, have you had some interesting stories of people that were learning to fly that have changed their plans at all, or do they seem to realize that it's just simply a temporary distraction?
No, I haven't heard yet of anybody who's going to change their plans. So,
okay,
but I can see why people might be worried.
Sure.
Well, hey, let's get back to stupid criminals.
Okay, is this one yours or mine? I can't remember.
This one's mine here. This comes from AINonline.com. Pilot allegedly flying DUI scheduled for arraignment. Well, there's a stupid thing, but not only that, crashing in the process is not a good way to get caught for DUI. Escaping without serious injury after crash landing his Cessna Citation 550 on July 19th at Nevada's Mesquite Airport, the sole occupant pilot, who was subsequently arrested on one count of operating a vehicle under the influence, has been scheduled for arraignment on April 15th. It's amazing how he crashes a year ago. He's just now getting scheduled for arraignment. But he was on a ferry flight from Pasco, Washington, headed for the Henderson Executive Airport in Las Vegas. And the plane, unfortunately, was consumed by a post-crash fire. The pilot, 41-year-old Ryan Dashiell of Spokane, was arrested on suspicion of operating an aircraft while under the influence of alcohol and is facing a gross misdemeanor charge. Wow, that shouldn't be a misdemeanor. I think that should be a felony. After the accident, he was taken to jail and is currently free on bail. According to records, he held notice it says held. I'm guessing he no longer holds an ATP certificate with airplane and helicopter privileges, flight instructor, multi-engine ratings, and was typed in several jets, including the Citation 500 series. Surveillance video captured the airplane as it was sliding across the runway shortly after touching down. The main landing gear had collapsed before the aircraft entered the video frame, and a large fire and dark smoke followed the airplane as it continued down the runway. I'm thinking that's not the only thing that has gone up in smoke. I'm thinking this pilot's career may have also gone up in smoke.
You can imagine, of course, when you fill out your paperwork for your physical every year, they ask you that, have you been convicted of any felonies in the previous since the previous exam? And most of us, of course, are lucky enough to say no. But of course, as you just said, misdemeanor. I don't think it asks about a misdemeanor, does it?
No, probably not. I remember talking with a pilot who was one of the crew on that Northwest flight. Gosh, it must have been 15, 20 years ago that got arrested. And that crew was taken off the plane after they had completed the flight and had a successful landing. No damage, no harm, no foul. He was convicted of a felony, and he spent a number of years hard time federal penitentiary.
You ain't kidding.
And he wrote a book about it. And I remember when I met with him and we talked, there was just something in his eyes. You could see that there's something about this guy really looked just a little bit haunted. I would imagine that experience was very, very traumatic. And that's something I think all of us want to avoid. Jail is one thing, federal prison, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, they, people don't realize when they do stupid things in cars that they could kill somebody if they hit them. But you try this in an airplane. I mean, if this person was actually under the influence, which it pretty much sounds like he was in a jet, I mean, God knows how many people he could have taken out on the ground if he'd screwed up the landing any more than he apparently did. I'm trying to think of why the gear would. Maybe he landed hard and the gear couldn't take the load, and so it collapsed and he slid down the runway. I don't know, but my God, I mean, when you found these stories today, did you Google stupid pilot stories or what?
These just showed up in the normal collection of stories that I do, but there were just so many of those this time within a 3-week period. I thought, man, this is amazing. But why don't you go up to this next one here from businessinsider.com.au.
It says that an airport worker is being accused of taking an airplane for a joyride. Of course, this person didn't have a pilot's license, And of course, the investigator said this was not the first time this fellow, Ryan Guy Parker, sorry, bud, you're outed, was arrested after being accused of taking an airplane for a joyride without a license back in September of 2018. The witnesses said that Parker flew in poor conditions. I'm assuming they meant weather conditions, came dangerously close to some fuel tanks on the ground, and made a rough landing. According to the affidavit filed on February 4th, this person knowingly and willfully took off in an airplane at Shannon Airport in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And several witnesses who were at the airport said he flew in, again, poor weather conditions and came within 50 feet of some fuel tanks, which could have had a very, very bad ending. Luckily, he missed them in his flight, which apparently lasted about 10 or 15 minutes. And the witnesses said that this fellow was flying a Territorn Tierra 2, which is a tongue twister. And the witness called the airplane a bucket of bolts. I don't know about you, Max, but I know what I mean when I say that airplane is a bucket of bolts. But it doesn't seem so strange that somebody would do this without a license, and they took one of the least airworthy airplanes around. After the Territorn Tierra 2 came down for landing, the suspect told one of the witnesses that he'd been working on the airplane when the throttle became stuck, causing him to go airborne. Of course, what he was doing, working on the airplane with the engine running so that the throttle sticking would make him go airborne, was not immediately available. But the non-pilot later confessed to flying other airplanes without a license. And the investigator also wrote in the affidavit that it's believed Parker flew another aircraft at another airport in Fredericksburg just a few weeks before the September 27th issue. But he's only being prosecuted for this one. Well, isn't that nice of them?
Yeah, that one's pretty weird. Guy who runs an airplane washing business accidentally took off because the throttle gets stuck. I mean, when you wash an airplane, do you have the throttle open and the engine running?
I don't know, but I'd say his career is certainly washed up.
Yeah, that's good. To me, this really highlights something which they often talk about at the commercial airliners, which is, see something, say something. Even at our small GA airports, sometimes you might see something that seems a little unusual. Definitely check it out. Let people know. This is not the only time I've heard of pilots or non-pilots doing things they shouldn't be doing at airports. So I think we are really kind of the eyes and ears of small airports.
Absolutely. And I think that too often people will look at situations and say, what the heck is that guy doing? I don't know. Boy, that's weird. And they walk away. Not a good plan when you're around airplanes.
Nope. Got to check it out. Well, we have two animal stories here. This first one comes from avweb.com, and it's stolen beaver rams 2 airline float planes at the dock. Yeah, police in Vancouver, British Columbia, are looking for the man who managed to get a commercial float plane started before ramming 2 others at the seaplane terminal at the city's harbor and causing major damage. Police were called to the dock at 3:30 a.m., not my favorite time to steal an airplane, to investigate reports that a man tried to steal a Sierra de Havilland beaver moored at the terminal in the city's downtown harbor.
So this isn't a real beaver. It's a pretend beaver.
Well, the next one is a real animal, but this is
okay.
This one's a stretch. The beaver's prop sliced holes in the fuselage and wing of a Harbor Air turbine de Havilland Otter and also damaged another Harbor Air plane. The beaver lost a wing and had prop damage. The would-be pilot reportedly fled on foot. So unlike all these other good stories where the people got caught, this one is apparently still at large. They say neither the airlines nor the police are discussing how someone might get access to a plane at the terminal and get it running. Well, hopefully they catch up with this person. I'm guessing they must not have security footage. Otherwise, they probably would have found him already.
Yeah, this is another. Of course, every story we've had, I say this is pretty weird, but I guess what it means is that there are an awful lot of people that really want to learn to fly, or actually that don't want to take the time to learn to fly, but just want to go for a ride.
Shortcuts is definitely a common theme here, whether it's a shortcut to getting your mechanic's license, a shortcut to flying an airplane. Shortcuts just are not good in aviation.
No, and maybe you could just get somebody to take you for a ride as opposed to taking the airplane on your own. No, I don't think that's such a great idea.
Nope.
How about this one? A helicopter crashes after hitting an elk. Now, I know from the last story, I thought the beaver that hit the other float planes was a real beaver, but it wasn't. And this time the elk is not an airplane. It's a real elk with horns and hooves and all that sort of thing. So let's get into it. A helicopter pilot reported he was maneuvering at low altitude in an attempt to net an elk near Heber City, Utah. And I'm assuming that means they were trying to capture this elk for some reason, and they were going to throw a net over him. So when the helicopter was above the elk, the pilot said his attention was immediately focused forward due to a small rise in terrain. He pitched the helicopter's nose up, and the helicopter started to shake and spin. And this was not to dance music. Subsequently, it hit the ground. The right skid broke off, and the helicopter came to rest on its right side. The post-accident exam revealed that the tail rotor hit the elk when the pilot pitched the helicopter's nose up, and that received substantial damage to both the tail boom and the rotor. The pilot reported that there were no pre-accident mechanical failures or malfunctions that would have precluded normal operations. And the probable cause was the pilot's failure to maintain clearance from the elk. Oh, really? While maneuvering at low altitude. But let's be sure, what's the real question here? What the Sam Hill happened to the elk?
Exactly. That's what I want to know. But I love this probable cause. I have never heard one that says failure to maintain clearance from an elk. That's pretty unique.
You can't make this stuff up. You're taking these stories from ASRS where the pilots or the people involved are actually writing the stories up themselves. And would you want to admit to your friends on the Saturday morning lunch that I hit an elk?
I think that's exactly the reaction. Everybody would be laughing. Which
I destroyed the helicopter because I hit an elk, and the elk didn't do very well either.
So hitting an elk is probably something most of us will never do, but there are a lot of people that have iPads. And it's kind of amazing to me how many iPad horror stories there are out there. So initially I found two of them that came up in my normal search of stories for Aviation News Talk. And then I thought, well, let's dig a little deeper and see how many times you run into iPad stories when you start searching NASA's ASRS database. But this actually comes from the NTSB because this was an iPad accident. Chief pilot of the flight school that operated the multi-engine airplane reported that the pilot receiving instruction was taxiing the airplane to the runway at the non-towered airport and was heads in, looking down and researching information on his iPad when he heard someone yell, "Stop." He quickly applied the brakes, but the airplane collided with an airplane stopped on the taxiway, holding short of the runway. Chief pilot further reported that the flight instructor was inputting radio frequencies and was unaware that the pilot was also looking inside the airplane. The instructor looked up just in time to hear the backseat passenger yell, "Stop," and see the collision. The safety coordinator of the flight school that operated the stopped airplane reported that while holding short of the runway and performing the before takeoff checklist, the flight instructor and pilot receiving instruction felt a hard impact from the rear. Yeah, that would be the twin-engine aircraft. The stopped airplane sustained substantial damage to the elevator. The safety coordinator and chief pilot both reported that there were no pre-accident mechanical failures or malfunctions with their respective airplanes that would have precluded normal operation. And the probable cause from the NTSB, a pilot receiving instructions, failure to see and avoid an airplane holding short of the runway on the taxiway, and the CFI's lack of situational awareness. Well, I can't tell you how many times I have seen people do things while they're taxiing that leads them to look down and not be looking outside when they're taxiing. And I tell them over and over and over again, if you need to do something while you're taxiing, stop the airplane, do it, and then continue. A lot of people feel that it's okay to be looking down, inputting all kinds of things. And I keep telling them that's no different than driving while texting. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that making certain you know what it is you're going to do. And I think so many of my habits were broken early on in my career when I got out of single pilot airplanes and started flying in a crew environment. And you'd have somebody else, stop the airplane, say, "What are you doing?" And you go, "Oh, what? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." And you have someone there to check on you, to keep you from doing some of the stupid things that we all do. But I also realize that most professional crews, if there's an issue that they need to stop the airplane for, like, "I'm sorry, we both need to be heads down for a minute," and that's the term we use. I'm heads down, you're looking out the window. If that's the decision, you don't do anything else. You just drive the airplane. You don't try to help. You don't try to check the other person's work by just glancing down here and there. It's a really bad idea. And they'll often tell you that if you need to stop the airplane, you stop the airplane and you set the parking brake, because it's very easy to stop the airplane and start saying, "Okay, wait, let's take a look at this situation," and not even realize that you're releasing some back pressure on the brakes, and suddenly the airplane's moving and you don't realize it because both of you are looking inside the cockpit. And I wish we could instill that on students, that you're either taxiing the airplane or you're stopped and you're inputting information or checking your charts if you still use them or whatever, but you can't be doing both, because you're going to kill yourself or somebody else.
And you raise a really good point about the parking brake. I think a lot of us who fly small aircraft are perhaps a little complacent about the parking brake. I know I always have been. I was kind of jolted by something that I saw, which has given me new emphasis on using it. Most of the time you're on flat surfaces. Hey, it doesn't matter if the brakes aren't on. I was at a location where I saw an owner of a Cirrus Vision jet who stopped the aircraft, climbed out, and walked away. And that jet started rolling backwards. And there was a lineman there who fortunately raced like crazy. He got there before I did, managed to get inside. I don't know how he got up the stairs and into the brakes before it would have gone into an area where the aircraft possibly would have been damaged. But boy, that left a big impact on me. I became a much bigger believer in setting the parking brakes, because, it doesn't happen often, but, that 1 in 1,000 time, you're going to be awfully disappointed you didn't do it.
Well, and honestly, too, I drive a car that has a manual transmission. We used to call that stick shift, for you people that don't know what we're talking about, where you actually move the gear shift. All right, anyway. But there'll be times that I'll park the car and put it in neutral and get out, and I've forgotten to pull the parking brake, just because maybe I was in a hurry to go to a store. And the best story I remember about that, and nobody was hurt and no damage was done, is that my daughter and I went to a movie. We parked the car in a parking lot that had a slight incline, and I was parked a little bit downhill. I didn't think anything of it. I got out, forgot to set the parking brake in the Mini. We came back and she said, "Dad, your car's gone." I said, "What?" She said, "We left, it's over there." I said, "Oh my Lord, it is, it's gone." And, there's no worse feeling than realizing you're in a parking lot and you go, "No, I really didn't forget where it was this time. It's really gone." And then she looked over my shoulder and she went, "There it is, off to the right, about 20 feet away from where we parked against the curb was my car. It had rolled downhill all by itself, luckily not very fast, but it hit the curb and stopped, and there it sat waiting for us to come back." Now, I've seen it happen in airplanes. It does. It sounds stupid, but oh my God, if you've ever had it happen in a car, trust me, it can happen in an airplane, and you're way more embarrassed in the airplane, I think.
Well, here's something that was probably a little bit more than embarrassing. This is from NASA's ASRS database. It's a Cessna 172RG. Why don't you tell folks about this report?
In this case, the pilot of a Cessna 172RG for retractable gear was making a night flight for the purpose of getting night current for carrying passengers, which meant the pilot would have been either with an instructor or by themselves. And since they just completed a flight review the week before, they were probably by themselves. Now, on this flight, the pilot says he was a little fatigued, but they pushed on, and my pre-flight included mounting my iPad to the yoke, which provided the for-flight navigation information for him, because, of course, nobody carries charts anymore. The iPad also blocked some of the instruments, including the gear position lights, and that is one of the problems with people using tablets, is that they can block things, and you have to be ready for that. Anyway, in this particular case, the pilot said, on downwind, I delayed lowering the gear to extend downwind for the approach. I forgot to go back and lower the gear and was reminded when the aircraft landed gear up. Oh, what do you think reminded the pilot, Max?
Maybe the blaring gear horn?
Or maybe the fact that it was the shortest short field approach you ever made.
There you go.
So I was the only person on board, and I wasn't injured. The aircraft sustained propeller damage and scrapes on the bottom. I believe that positioning the iPad in a way so as not to obstruct the gear position lights would have prevented this incident. It's not the only thing. You could have looked around the iPad or over the iPad, or you could have had a procedure. I still do this to this day. If I'm in command of the gear, once I touch the gear selector switch, I do not let go of it until the gear is down and I see all green. I cannot imagine a situation where I would not put the gear down in the pattern because I wanted to extend the pattern a little bit, specifically because of this kind of a situation. Once you get things out of sequence, you're going to screw it up. And the pilot said finally that it would have been beneficial to fly with an instructor on my first night flight in over a year because I'd only had 1.3 hours in. And I hope this input serves to prevent a repeat, not just for this pilot, but for others. I mean, really, let's think about it. How many times have you seen pilots make smart mistakes in airplanes? Very seldom.
No, this one really strikes me as someone who doesn't really get the full picture here. He's blaming an iPad, and yet there are so many other obvious problems that went on here. First, he said he's fatigued. Well, guess what, folks? There are all kinds of studies that show that fatigue is equivalent to a loss in performance equal to being 0.08 drunk. And so, yeah, if you're flying fatigued, you are asking for trouble. He said he hadn't flown a year in this aircraft. Oh, and that he'd only had 1.3 hours recently in the airplane. My guess is perhaps he was flying fixed gear aircraft and he wasn't flying retractable gear real often. What about checklists and procedures? Ever heard of GUMPS? Gear, undercarriage, mixture, prop. And I was always taught to do a GUMPS check 3 times. So that's 3 different opportunities in the pattern to verify that you got the gear down. So was it because the iPad was obstructing the gear lights? No.
I don't think so.
No. But it's certainly a nice way to kind of let yourself off the hook and go, it wasn't my fault. It was that iPad's fault.
Well, you know what I can't figure out is, well, I'll save my comment till you read the next one because it's another iPad story.
It is. So this also comes from the ASRS database. It's a Cessna Citation 560, our second citation story here. Routine pre-flight by the right seat pilot, according to the reporters right up here. He said normal startup, annunciator panel normal. During prep for taxiing and obtaining IFR clearance, the left seat pilot dropped an iPad on the left armrest and the breaker panel area. Didn't think anything of it. Obtained taxi clearance. After leaving the ramp area with left seat pilot taxiing, the master caution light began to flash, followed shortly by the failure of the brakes as we approached a 90-degree right turn onto the taxiways. Right seat pilot recognized that the power brake annunciator was lit, reached across the cockpit to reset the breaker for the brakes. Braking action returned immediately. During the few seconds the brakes were inoperative, the airplane got off the edge of the taxiway and into the grass. Grass was pretty smooth, relatively flat, and we did not contact any taxi lights or anything else while in the grass. Then saw two pieces of a circuit breaker collar on the armrest that had been on the power brake breaker for years. Knew that the dropped iPad had hit the collar, which stood taller than the surrounding breakers, tripping the breaker and breaking the collar. Continued taxi with completely normal brake function, so felt no reason to delay the trip. After talking to maintenance the next day, decided to replace the breaker.
Oh, my Lord. Okay, so my first big question is, what's wrong with a Microsoft tablet? How come nobody uses one of those? Why is it always an iPad? No, I know it's because they're more popular than anything else. But seriously, these damned tablets are just getting people in trouble because they are distracting people. And as you said earlier, pilots in an airplane with an iPad, it can be just as dangerous as somebody texting or checking their email while they're driving. If they're playing with an iPad and they're the only person in the airplane, they're not flying the airplane. And you can't do both. You just can't.
Yeah, and I think the point here is, the iPads, the tablets, the electronic flight bag applications, they are awesome. They have just great amount of data. Yes, they have revolutionized flying. Yes, I am so happy they exist. But just like reaching down and looking inside while you're taxiing, people underestimate how the tablet can become a problem. I think sometimes younger pilots who are very tech savvy are more likely to get distracted. I know one young gentleman who went off to do his instrument check ride, and he didn't get very far at all. I mean, he literally was practically still on downwind leaving the airport, and he had been playing so much with that iPad that he had completely lost situational awareness, and the examiner terminated the check ride right there on the spot. And I know that because I was the next person to fly the airplane, and he had left his $800 Stratus sitting right there on the glare shield of the airplane. He was so upset. So just got to keep in mind that this is supposed to be a supplement to your flying skills. This is not the main activity. This is not like the simulator you play with at home, where your technology is your main appliance, if you will. In the airplane, no, the control stick, the instruments, those are the primary thing. This is a supplemental thing. Don't get distracted by it.
Well, and this kind of thing is of being distracted isn't really brand new. I mean, when we were students, or you had students that you were flying with, they would have a chart maybe on their knee, and they'd be trying to keep that straight and, looking down at their knee while they're supposed to be flying the airplane, or trying to identify a point on the ground. And all that can happen. But this is why every story you read, they say the same thing: fly the airplane. This is what they're talking about. Even if you're lost, fly the airplane. Because trust me, if you don't fly the airplane, you're going to be way more than lost if the airplane gets away from you. People just keep learning or relearning the same lesson.
Well, and that leads directly into the next one, which the story I thought was summarized by one line, and it wasn't even worth reading the rest of the story. Go ahead and read that one line there.
A B-33 pilot, that's a debonair, a beach debonair, reported a battery failure aboard his iPad during flight. And obviously, because of that failure, he landed at the wrong airport. Stupid iPad.
Oh, this just brings up so many things. I mean, talk about reliance on one thing. But the big thing in my mind is, where's your backup?
Yeah, good question. Where's the backup battery? Well, there isn't any for an iPad, but you need a backup power source. But
there could be, right? He could have had a power brick. Those are just everywhere. People use them to power phones and other devices. That would be something that they could have done. They could have had a second device in the airplane. I travel with both the iPhone and the iPad. If there are two pilots, we usually have probably a minimum of 3 devices in the airplane among us with multiple pilots. And I forget, what's that backup people used to use? It's kind of made out of trees. What was that stuff?
Do you mean well, I'm sure you're not referring to this, but you don't mean a paper chart.
No, papyrus is what I was thinking of.
Oh, right. Well, I thought
Yes,
maybe
of
at
course.
first you were talking about when they used to use a hammer and chisel and put things on stone tablets.
Those sectionals were very unwieldy.
Well, they were. There's no doubt about that. But all of this stuff is it's just insane because it's a new generation of pilots with new toys, and they're making many of the same mistakes even more often. Because let's face it, an iPad's pretty cool, or a Microsoft Surface tablet, because they're in color, they move, they'll talk to you. How could you not be distracted by that a little bit? It's work. It is really work to keep yourself from letting the iPad fly you and the airplane. You're up there because you're supposed to be in charge. And all of these stories are about people who forgot that.
I like how you phrase that, by the way, because often when I'm in the airplane, I have to consciously, and usually, by the way, I'm sitting in the right seat, but still I have to consciously put away my phone and stop, checking it all the time, which is what we tend to do in the rest of our lives. And we've got to change that behavior when we're in the airplane. It's a different environment, requires an entirely different discipline. Speaking of discipline, this also comes from the ASRS database. And it really shows, I think, how when you're flying at night, everything becomes more difficult. And in this case, an iPad could have easily caused an accident. This involved an A119 helicopter, according to the report. The pilot wrote, "The medical crew and I accepted a call for a hospital transport. I was waiting for an approved flight risk assessment while installing my night vision goggles standing next to the pilot's seat. After the flight risk assessment was approved, I showed it to one of my medical crew and announced green. I then placed the iPad, which I assume had the flight risk assessment app on it, on the floor, leaned it against the center console while securing my logbook, clipboard, and handheld radio. The crew and I ensured the aircraft was unplugged and ready to be moved. The aircraft was pulled out of the hangar with both of the medical crew as wing walkers and was placed in its designated position faced into the wind. I completed my walk around and announced that the aircraft was ready for flight. I climbed into the aircraft, went through my checklist, and started the aircraft. The aircraft was safe and ready for flight. I announced to the company communication center my intentions. I picked the aircraft up after receiving an all clear from the crew. We then cleared the cart, the tail, and the sky before initiating a takeoff. So this guy was following all the right procedures. During my power pool at an altitude of approximately 40 feet, I felt the cyclic bind while putting in forward left pressure. This caused the aircraft to start a right drift. The crew asked me if I saw the tied-down fixed-wing aircraft that we were drifting toward. I announced that I had a control malfunction causing me to drift right. We continued to gain altitude and bank to the right as I was rapidly trying to identify the issue and keep the crew calm. I announced to the company that we had a potential hydraulic malfunction. The bank continued and we started to lose altitude because of it. As we approached the taxiway, I was able to free the controls and slow the aircraft down. I performed a precautionary run-on landing, although I did not feel any continued indication of a problem. While doing so, the crew announced that we were aborting the flight and that they smelled smoke. I attributed the smell to the run-on landing. While stopped, I started to troubleshoot the malfunction by isolating each hydraulic servo. While feeling out the controls, I reached down and saw that the iPad had wedged itself between the center console and the cyclic, impeding my ability to move the cyclic left. I announced to the comm center what happened and briefed the crew to my tremendous mistake. In hindsight, I could see the exact moment where I would have normally ensured the iPad was free and away from the controls, but moved on to the next item on the agenda. Because it was night, I did not notice the iPad when I entered the aircraft and again missed another opportunity to correct its placement. In the future, I will always place the iPad in the same secured location and perform a check prior to startup, ensuring that the controls are visually unobstructed from potential hazards. All I can say is, wow, this crew is lucky they weren't killed.
And doesn't this remind you of that helicopter that went down in the Hudson last year when the passengers somehow in the left front seat hooked their shoulder harness under the fuel shutoff valve and apparently moved around and cut the fuel to the helicopter, and the thing went down. I think the pilot saw it just before they hit, but it didn't have enough time to get the engine restarted. You know, everybody thinks that these kinds of simple things are so easy to overcome. It just seems to me like so often it's the simple, stupid things that we don't seem to be able to avoid because we're human. And there's a reason that humans are involved in, one form or another in probably 3/4 of the accidents that we see in this industry.
Yes, it certainly highlights the need to always pay attention to the details all the time, always follow the procedures. If you get interrupted, as this person kind of was, go back to your procedures and go back a couple steps previously in your checklist just so you don't accidentally miss something.
Yeah, but everybody thinks it won't happen to them.
Well, why don't you go ahead and read through the next 3 short ones? These all happened in airliners. These all involved iPads. They're pretty short.
And these were all professional flight crews, folks. These are people who, I won't say should know better, but that's what I'm thinking. But having made a few mistakes myself, it can happen. Okay, here's the first one. A Boeing 747 first officer reported that during rotation at takeoff, the iPad mounting bracket fell and restricted movement of the control yoke. So, of course, the question is, why the Sam Hill was it mounted in such a place that if it ever came loose, it would screw up the movement of the yoke? Because right at rotation is the worst time for something like that to happen, especially if it caused the one of the pilots to over-rotate or just get the nose up too high. Good God, the airplane could have stalled. Okay, next one. An air taxi captain reported the Aviation IFD 540, which is a flight management system, automatically switched frequencies without the flight crew's input or knowledge when they opened up the IFD 100 app on the iPad. And there are some of these now that you can input data on an iPad and they can be Wi-Fi'd over or Bluetoothed over to the main system. But apparently somebody did something on an iPad and hit a button, or maybe there was a failure of the unit, but it switched the frequencies. And that's also a surprise. Nothing like a controller saying, "Hello, 85 Golf, are you here? Are you receiving me?" And the guys in the cockpit are going, "Boy, it sure sounds kind of quiet on frequency, doesn't it?" And nobody knows what's going on.
And this one really surprised me. I've used the IFD 540 before. It's a combination of COM nav GPS navigator, pretty common to find. And I do vaguely remember that there's an app available for it. I had no idea that this kind of failure could occur where simply opening the app might cause the frequency to switch. And maybe the reporter actually did something more than that. Maybe they opened the app and then actually accidentally touched something on the app that caused the frequency to switch. But this is kind of a new way that we haven't had to worry about in the past where things can get screwed up.
Well, in the old days, it used to be something simple like we hit the wrong button on the audio panel by mistake and transmitting on one frequency and listening on another, or something jackass like that. But you're right. These are new and improved ways to make the same old mistakes. Our final one, a Boeing 737-900 captain said the side iPad mount in the cockpit was unsafe and interfered with his ability to fly the airplane. Okay, so I wonder how the pilot figured that out. They didn't give us any details, did they?
Well, there was a long write-up, but this kind of summarized the whole thing. I think in the airlines that the mounts are mounted, by the airline themselves. And so it kind of sounded like when it was first mounted, the people mounting it didn't give full consideration as to whether it was going to interfere with the controls. I did read a report, which I didn't include here, in which pilot reported to NASA that the mounting bracket was not working well for the large version of the iPad. So you could see conceivably that maintenance crew might have installed it and all the testing might have been done with a medium-sized iPad, and then someone came along with the newest, latest, greatest, largest iPad, and then suddenly there's a problem.
Absolutely. And having tried to fly a Cirrus one time with a regular iPad, which is, what is it? It's probably 10 inches across, I think,
Yeah.
or something like that. It didn't work out very well, even when I attached it to the door. And of course, the nice thing about a Cirrus, there's really no good suction cup location in a Cirrus down below the glare shield. I mean, you pretty much stick it to one of the doors. One of the windows on either door, or it doesn't go. It just doesn't, unless you have some other kind of mechanical mount that works in that airplane, because suction doesn't get it.
Well, I could see why you might want to mount one in one of the really early Cirruses prior to about 2003 that were round gauge only. I find that I never have a need to mount the iPad because we've got such great information available on the two glass panels. And so usually my phone or iPad is either in my lap or down at my side because I don't need it there in front of me all the time. It would be totally redundant and possibly, blocking view of those screens. So I usually use them to look up information such as charts and things like that. But in those aircraft, or probably most any aircraft with large glass cockpits, to me, there's less of a need to mount an iPad.
Yeah, I agree. But again, I think, this is just me, I don't like it when I just drop it on the seat next to me if there's nobody with me, because it's bad enough to look down, but to have to look over into the other seat and then pick it up and then look at it and go, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be flying the airplane. It's just not a good routine. I'd rather have it Velcroed to a little board on my leg or something where I know, with the location's the same and it's in the same place all the time. But again, that's just me.
Well, and you also raise a point, which is if you hit turbulence, that thing could become a flying object that you don't really want to have, especially if it ends up totally out of reach when you then need it.
Or if it hits you in the head.
Yeah, exactly. So I often have mine down kind of on the floor because I'm not bringing it up that often. Or if I'm using my phone, hey, it's in my pocket and I just pull it out when I need it. So it's pretty well secured.
And I have the larger screen on an iPhone that I specifically got for this reason, but I often will fly with that, and I keep my ForeFlight up to date on that, and it's really pretty nice. I know where the phone is. I can put it in my shirt pocket. It's really comfy, and I can still read what's on it very easily. I mean, I can't imagine why anybody would not want that along with them, and it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with than the iPad. But that's just me.
Well, Rob, as we start to wrap up here our news of the weird, any kind of final thoughts about it?
I think what I took away from this little exercise, thank you for doing this, is that we're not making a lot of new mistakes. We're just finding new ways to make the same old mistakes, like not flying the airplane, letting ourselves be distracted by something, the dog in the back seat, a chatty passenger, an iPad, anything. It's fly the airplane. There's a reason you keep hearing people say that, because we keep making that mistake.
And I think the first time I heard the priorities, aviate, navigate, communicate, I thought, oh, that's pretty simple-minded. Surely there are times when communication's more important. And boy, over the years, especially as I became a flight instructor, I have become convinced that is absolutely brilliant. There are so many times when I see people go to communicate when there are other far more important things that they should be doing. So yeah, you're right. We just need to stick to the basics, even if there are some new ways to get distracted. Distractions have always been with us. There are just new ways to get distracted.
Yeah, absolutely. So fly safe out there, folks. And remember, it can happen to you.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Rob, hey, thanks so much for taking the time today during this crazy week of coronavirus to help us sort through news of the weird. Tell us, where can people find out more about Rob Mark?
They can check us out on Twitter or on Instagram at Jetwine, but also at Jetwine on the web for the Jetwine blog that Scott Spangler and I write, and also at flyingmag.com for all the cool stories I seem to get wrapped up in for Flying Magazine. And how about you? Where are people going to find you, Max?
Well, I think they know where to find me, which is probably inside my house for a while longer, as well as here on Aviation News Talk. So this means we'll probably have more time to chat on the phone.
I think that is absolutely true. And if I find any funny stories in aviation, I will bring them to you, and you can talk about them.
That'll be fun. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a hoot.
It is always fun having Rob Mark on the show, and I thank him very much. I've included links in the show notes to his jetwine.com blog and to Flying Magazine where he works. And in a moment, I'll give you a quick update on how radically my world has changed in the last 7 days. But first, I want to say if you have enjoyed this show and appreciate the time I spent producing it, please consider joining other listeners who've decided to support the show by sending a few dollars each month via credit card to show their appreciation. There are 2 very easy ways to do that. One is to make a monthly donation to the show, which you can do through Patreon. And the easiest way to get there is to click the link in our show notes, or you can open a web browser and type in aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, because you're all awesome listeners. And while you're there, you can see the various goodies we offer at different contribution levels. Or if you want to make just a one-time donation, you can do that easily by using PayPal, and you don't even need a PayPal account to do that. Just click the link in our show notes, or you can open a web browser and type in aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And I thank you all for your support. Now, here's how my world turned upside down in the last 7 days. I've been planning to fly to Las Vegas on Thursday on Southwest for a Cirrus Partners seminar that I attend each year for flight instructors. And on Wednesday morning, I woke up early to check in online for the flight so that I would get a low boarding number for the flight. But then an hour later, I saw an article in the Mercury News saying that 3 TSA agents at San Jose International, where I would be flying out of, had tested positive for the virus. I posted that story on my Facebook page, and it drew a huge number of comments and links to several good articles and videos. And 2 of the links influenced me a lot, and I'll include links to them in our show notes. One is a video by, I believe, a math professor, which showed exponential growth curves of viruses. And at the end of the video, he made what I thought was the most important point of all. The end of the video makes the point that we can dramatically reduce the number of total cases by limiting contact now. And I think I somehow thought that we would all eventually get the virus anyway, but that's clearly not true. Changing behaviors early in the pandemic will result in fewer total cases. And the second link was to an article, and its main point, which was really buried in a sea of data, is that it's important to start making changes in our behavior today as things will be worse tomorrow. It was hard to ignore the data as I live in Santa Clara County, which has a quarter of all COVID-19 cases in California, making our risk greater than people in other parts of the state. So mid-Wednesday, I canceled the trip to Las Vegas. And as I thought about it further, I realized it would be irresponsible of me to either spread the virus if I already have it, or to catch it and bring it back to my family. And I hadn't planned on canceling my flight training flights until a local doctor I sometimes fly with commented on that same post that he was canceling his flights so as not to risk passing the virus since he's at high risk of catching it and he didn't want to pass it on to CFIs. It made me realize that the opposite is also true. There's no point in my passing along the virus to my clients if I should catch it. So I sent out an email around noon on Wednesday to my clients letting them know that I was canceling all flights for the next 10 days, which was through the end of this week, and that this week I'd reevaluate what to do for following weeks. And in the 7 days since I sent the email, I've stayed at home, and my wife and I have canceled everything that would bring us into contact with other people, including family that lives nearby. A lot has changed in those 7 days, and it's clear to me that I took the right steps early on. 5 days ago, I received an email from another flying club that I don't teach at, detailing the steps they're taking to clean and sanitize planes and facilities. And late last night, I received an email from the club that I do teach at, saying that they have closed the club for the next 3 weeks. And this morning, a shelter-in-place order became effective in my county and 6 other counties here in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has about 7 million people. I've provided a link in the show notes with an FAQ for the Santa Clara County order in case you're interested in more of the details. But briefly, it's a legally enforceable order telling residents to stay at home and not to leave the house except for necessary trips. The order is in effect for 3 weeks until April 7th. I'll read part of it now. The order restricts travel to essential activities, activities necessary for the health and safety for individuals and their families, Essential businesses allowed to operate during the recommended action include healthcare operations, businesses that provide food, shelter, and social services, and other necessities of life for economically disadvantaged or otherwise needy individuals, fresh and non-perishable food retailers, including convenience stores, pharmacies, childcare facilities, gas stations, banks, laundry businesses, and services necessary for maintaining the safety, sanitation, and essential operations of a residence. And of course, all non-essential businesses are closed for the duration. And if you wonder if this is mandatory or just a guideline, yeah, it's mandatory because it's a legal order. And yes, we can go outside of our home for some things. Reading again from the FAQ, the intent of this order is to ensure that people remain in their residences and minimize social interactions outside of their immediate family unit. However, you may leave your residence for reasons specified in the order. These reasons include ensuring the health and safety of yourself and your family, engaging in outdoor activity that does not involve close contact with other people, obtaining services and supplies for yourself and your family, and to perform employment functions that are permissible under the order. So, yes, I've been out walking most days, so I'm getting more exercise than I usually do. I did go to Starbucks 2 or 3 days ago, and they pulled out all the tables, and there were 0 customers inside, and my mobile order was way behind on the counter. When I gave my name, they pushed my drink forward, stepped back, and I stepped forward to pick it up. So, yes, most people in my area are taking this very seriously. The number of cases here are doubling every 2 to 3 days, and when that happens, numbers get big fast. And the first death in my county occurred last week in the hospital that's just a few blocks away from my home. So if there's no coronavirus in your area, well, congratulations. You're lucky so far, but this is what people are doing in areas that do have the virus. It's a new reality, but humans can be flexible, and if most of us change our behaviors, we will get through this quickly. In the meantime, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.